elderly black woman humiliated at the bank. But the Mafia boss was there. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. It was a typical Monday morning at First National Bank, located in the heart of the city's bustling financial district. The marble floors gleamed under the bright overhead lights, and the air was filled with the soft hum of conversation and the rustling of paperwork. At one of the counters, an elderly black woman, Margaret Hayes, stood nervously, clutching a small envelope of cash in her hands. The 72-year-old had saved up for months to make this deposit, scraping by with the odd cleaning job and cutting back on everything else just to keep her head above water. Today, she was here to pay her overdue property taxes, the last thing standing between her and losing the small house her late husband had left her. She had every right to be there, but as she approached the counter, she could already feel the eyes of others on her. The young teller, a man named Brandon, was busy typing away at his computer, barely glancing up as she placed the envelope down in front of him. His expression was polite but cold, and Margaret, feeling the weight of his indifference, began to fidget with her purse. "Good morning, sir," she said softly, her voice carrying the gentle southern accent she had never been able to shake, even after living in the city for over 40 years. Brandon didn't respond at first. He picked up the envelope, his fingers barely touching it, as if it were something unsavory, and then his face twisted into a slight sneer. "Cash," he said, the word coming out like a taunt. "Do you have any idea how much paperwork cash deposits require?" Margaret felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she said nothing, hoping to avoid further confrontation. She had worked so hard for this money, and the last thing she needed was to be treated like a criminal. But it didn't stop there. Brandon continued, his tone rising, as the people in line behind Margaret shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sure you counted it yourself, but we'll have to verify it, of course," he said, drawing the bills out one by one. "And why exactly are you paying in cash? Let me guess, you don't have a bank account." The way he said it made Margaret feel like she was being judged, like she didn't belong in a place like this. The line of customers grew longer, and Margaret could feel their eyes on her. She felt small, invisible, and suddenly very out of place. Brandon continued to count the money slowly, as if savoring every moment of Margaret's discomfort. His words were laced with mockery, and she could hear the whispering from the people behind her. "I think I need to call the manager. We have policies about suspicious deposits, money laundering, and fraud." Margaret's hands began to tremble as she stood there, helpless and humiliated. She had never been a person to raise her voice, but in that moment, she felt a fire burning inside her. Why was she being treated this way? She had worked all her life, paid her dues, and yet, here she was, being made to feel like a criminal in her own city. Her heart pounded in her chest, and just as she was about to speak up, a figure appeared at the entrance of the bank. The door swung open, and a tall man in a sharp black suit stepped inside. His presence was commanding, and the atmosphere in the room seemed to shift. Heads turned, and the room grew quieter. Margaret's breath caught in her throat as she realized who it was. He was none other than William Castellano, one of the most powerful men in the city. His reputation preceded him, and while most people knew him as a ruthless businessman with ties to organized crime, Margaret had heard enough stories to know he wasn't someone you crossed. William Castellano wasn't just any rich man. He was a mafia boss with connections that spanned the globe. He looked around the room, his cold, calculating eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Margaret. Without a word, he began walking toward the counter, his presence filling the space, exuding authority. Brandon, who had been so quick to belittle Margaret, froze the moment he noticed William approaching. The room fell silent as the mafia boss reached the counter. He didn't even look at Brandon. Instead, he fixed his gaze on Margaret, his eyes softening just for a moment as if recognizing something in her. "Is there a problem here?" William's voice was deep, but it carried an undeniable edge of power. Brandon, who had been treating Margaret with so much disdain, stammered, I was just processing this deposit, sir. There's nothing wrong." William's gaze didn't waver as he glanced at the envelope in Brandon's hands. "Do you know who this is?" he asked, his voice suddenly low, but with a dangerous undertone. Brandon looked taken aback, but quickly nodded. "Yes, sir, I know who she is." The tone in his voice suggested that he had realized the gravity of the situation, but it was too late. William turned to Margaret, his demeanor shifting to one of unexpected warmth. "I apologize for this," he said, nodding to Brandon, who stood frozen, not sure how to respond. "Please, take a seat. I'll take care of this personally." Margaret was in shock. She had no idea what was happening, but she could feel the tension in the room lift. Her whole body was still shaking, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt seen. She wasn't invisible anymore. William Castellano had made sure of that. As William Castellano stood there, his eyes locked on Margaret, the room felt as though time had frozen. The tension that had filled the air moments ago had vanished, replaced by an undeniable calm. Margaret's heart still raced from the ordeal, but now, she felt a strange sense of relief. She hadn't imagined she would ever be treated with such dignity in a place like this. The powerful man who had just walked into the bank, someone who could make people disappear with a single word, was now standing in front of her, offering her an apology. She had no idea what was going to happen next, but she couldn't shake the feeling that everything had just changed. William motioned for her to sit down in one of the plush chairs in the corner of the bank, away from the counter. She hesitated at first, still shaken by the earlier events, but something in his presence made her feel that it was safe to follow his lead. As she sank into the chair, William turned to face the teller, who was now looking nervous and unsure of himself. Brandon had been completely caught off guard by William's sudden appearance and his words of authority. William's cold gaze had turned the situation from one of mockery to one of immediate control, and Brandon had no choice but to comply. "I suggest you finish the transaction for Mrs. Hayes and take a moment to reflect on your actions," William said, his voice calm but stern. Brandon quickly nodded, fumbling with the envelope and cash. He was clearly uncomfortable, his fingers shaking as he processed the deposit. William didn't seem to notice, or perhaps he simply didn't care. He turned back to Margaret, his expression softening once again. "Margaret, I'm sorry you had to experience that. No one should be treated like that, especially not someone who's worked as hard as you have." Margaret's breath caught in her throat. She had no idea how William knew about her struggles, but hearing him speak so kindly to her made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time, seen. She hadn't realized how much she longed for someone to acknowledge the sacrifices she'd made in her life. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "But why? Why did you step in for me? I'm just a woman trying to pay my taxes." William's eyes narrowed slightly as he studied her, almost as if he were considering how much to reveal. "Because, Margaret, people like you don't deserve to be treated like that. You've worked hard, and that deserves respect. Not just from the people around you, but from the world. And I make sure people like that get what they deserve," he said, glancing over at Brandon, who was still fumbling with the paperwork. There was a moment of silence before William spoke again, his voice softer this time. "My name is William Castellano. I run a number of businesses here in the city, but I've always had a special place for people who put in the work, no matter what their background is. Your work, it speaks volumes." Margaret blinked, trying to process his words. She had heard the name before, of course. Who hadn't? But now, standing in front of her, he didn't seem like the ruthless figure she had imagined. Instead, he seemed genuine. "I'm not asking for anything in return," William continued. "I just couldn't stand by and watch someone like you be humiliated for doing something so simple. You deserve to have the respect of others, and if I can help make that happen, then I will." Margaret didn't know how to respond. She was overwhelmed with gratitude, but also confused. Why was this man, someone she had never met, going out of his way to help her? "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that you're not alone," William replied. There was something in his tone that made Margaret feel like she could trust him, even though she barely knew him. He didn't just stand up for her in the moment. He was offering something much deeper, a sense of dignity. Just as the transaction was completed, William placed a hand on Margaret's shoulder, a reassuring gesture that caught her by surprise. "You're not invisible, Margaret. And you shouldn't let anyone make you feel that way. Not ever again," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. For the first time in a long time, Margaret felt like she was no longer just the invisible woman in the background. She was seen. As she left the bank, her heart was lighter, and for the first time in a while, she dared to believe that things might just be different from now on. Outside, the city hummed with its usual energy, but to Margaret, the world felt a little brighter. And in that moment, she realized that sometimes, it only takes one person to make you feel like you matter again. William Castellano had done just that. As Margaret left the bank, she could still feel the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. The encounter with William Castellano had been unexpected, to say the least, and yet something about it left her with a sense of clarity she had not known in years. The oppressive weight of financial struggles, the endless cycle of debt, had always clouded her mind. But now, with William's words lingering in her thoughts, it felt as if a door had been opened, and a glimpse of a future she hadn't dared to imagine was there, just beyond her reach. Walking down the street, she couldn't help but replay the events in her head, still trying to process how a man of such power could be so kind. She had heard the rumors. William Castellano was known as a ruthless businessman, a man who commanded respect through fear. Yet, in the brief interaction they had shared, there was no trace of the cold, calculating figure she had imagined. Instead, there had been something almost humane in his presence. Something that made her believe that not all power was wielded for harm. It was then that Margaret noticed a black car pulling up to the curb, its windows tinted and sleek. She didn't pay it much attention at first, but as the car stopped beside her, the door opened, and out stepped none other than William Castellano. His tall frame emerged from the vehicle, his suit as sharp as ever, but his expression was softer this time, almost concerned. "Margaret," he said, his voice carrying the same calm authority as before. "I'd like to speak with you for a moment." Margaret froze for a second, unsure of what to do. She had just finished her business at the bank, and now, here he was, asking to speak with her. She had no reason to refuse, and in that moment, something within her told her this was more than just a coincidence. With a slight nod, she stepped toward the car, and William gestured for her to get in. "Don't worry. I'm not going to bite," he said with a small, reassuring smile. His words made her chuckle nervously, and she slid into the back seat. The interior of the car was as luxurious as she had imagined, with leather seats and a polished wooden dashboard that gleamed under the low light. William sat across from her, his eyes never leaving hers as the car began to drive. The city's streets passed by in a blur, and for a moment, the silence between them felt heavier than usual. Margaret shifted uncomfortably in her seat, trying to steady her nerves. Finally, William spoke again. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone still calm, but laced with a hint of something more serious. "You've worked hard all your life, and yet the system has made it so difficult for you to get by. It's not right." Margaret was taken aback. She wasn't used to hearing this from someone like him. People of power often ignored those like her, as if they didn't matter. But here was William Castellano, a man whose empire spanned across multiple industries, acknowledging her struggle. "I've had my share of difficulties," he continued. "But there's one thing I know for sure. No one should ever be made to feel invisible." Margaret's heart skipped a beat. He was right. For so long, she had felt invisible, like the world was passing her by, while she struggled to keep up. The thought that someone like William Castellano, someone with so much power, had noticed her was both humbling and overwhelming. "You deserve better, Margaret," he said, leaning forward slightly. "And I want to make sure you get it." Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but words failed her. She wasn't sure if she should feel grateful or cautious. William Castellano was offering her something she had never thought possible, but there was always a price, wasn't there? She had heard enough stories to know that nothing in his world came without strings attached. "What are you offering?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. William smiled, a small but knowing smile that made her stomach flutter. "I can offer you something no one else can. A chance to truly change your life. But you'll have to trust me." Trust him? Margaret thought. That was the hardest part. Trusting a man who operated in the shadows, whose influence stretched far beyond what she could understand. But in that moment, Margaret realized something. She had nothing left to lose. The struggle to keep her home, the constant fight to make ends meet. She couldn't do it alone anymore. "What's the catch?" she asked, finally meeting his gaze. No catch, he replied, his voice steady. I just want to help you. I've seen too many people like you go unnoticed, pushed aside by the system, and it's time someone did something about it. Margaret's mind raced. Was it really possible? Could this man, this stranger, truly help her in a way that no one else could? I don't know what to say, she admitted. You don't have to say anything right now, William replied. But I promise you, I can help you get the respect and the life you deserve. As the car sped through the city, Margaret couldn't help but feel a sense of hope she hadn't experienced in years. Maybe, just maybe, William Castellano was the answer she had been looking for all along. As the car made its way through the city streets, Margaret couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief. William Castellano's offer was so unexpected, so beyond anything she had imagined, that it was hard to process. She had lived a life of hard work and sacrifice, always struggling to keep her head above water. But now, sitting in this sleek, luxurious car with the man who had just turned her world upside down, she couldn't help but wonder, was this a dream? Was she being played? William sat across from her, his demeanor calm and collected, as if offering someone a life-changing opportunity was just another day at the office. I'm not used to being helped, Margaret said finally, breaking the silence that had hung between them since the offer had been made. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the uncertainty she felt deep inside. William's gaze softened as he looked at her, the cool, calculating look that usually dominated his face replaced by something almost compassionate. You're not used to being seen, he replied quietly. That's the problem. People like you get overlooked, pushed aside, and it's time for that to change. Margaret swallowed hard. She wasn't used to people talking to her like this, like she mattered, like her struggles were worth acknowledging. I've worked my whole life, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I've never asked for anything, not from anyone. I just wanted to keep my home, take care of my family, and now, I'm about to lose it all. William leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing with focus. You don't have to lose it, he said, his voice firm. I can help you keep your home, but I can do more than that. I can help you rebuild your life, Margaret. I can help you take back the dignity that's been stripped from you. Margaret's heart raced at the thought. She had spent so many years in a constant state of survival, trying to make ends meet, that the idea of something more, something better, seemed impossible. But here William was, offering her that very thing. She glanced out the window, watching the city pass by in a blur. How can you help me? She asked, her voice small, almost afraid to believe what she was hearing. William gave her a measured look, as if he were deciding how much to reveal. I've built my empire on understanding people like you, he said. I've seen the struggles. I know the system is rigged against you, but I also know how to navigate it. I can open doors for you, give you opportunities you never thought possible. It's not just about money. It's about giving you control of your future, a chance to stand up and be seen, not just as someone who's barely scraping by, but as someone who deserves respect. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. The weight of his words hung in the air, and for a moment, she felt a flicker of hope, a small, fragile spark that had been absent from her life for so long. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything right now, William said. But you should know that I don't offer these opportunities to just anyone. I see something in you, Margaret. I see someone who's fought for everything she has, and who's willing to keep fighting. That's rare, and that's why I'm willing to help you. Margaret sat in stunned silence, her mind racing. She had always thought that people like her, people from her background, didn't get second chances. They didn't get opportunities handed to them. But here William was, telling her that she did. It didn't make sense, and yet, it felt like the one thing that might actually make a difference in her life. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice hesitant. William leaned back in his seat, a slight smile playing at the corners of his lips. I don't want anything from you, Margaret, he said. But I do expect something in return. Margaret's eyes narrowed. What's that? William's smile faded slightly, replaced by a more serious expression. I expect you to take this chance, to trust me. I can't do this for you. You have to want it. You have to believe that you deserve it. Margaret felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Relief, gratitude, fear, uncertainty. She had never been someone who trusted easily, and yet, there was something about William's calm, assured presence that made her want to believe him. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a real chance, not just to survive, but to live. I'll do it, she said, her voice firm. I'll take the chance. William nodded, his eyes gleaming with approval. Good, he said. You won't regret it, Margaret. I'll make sure of that. As the car pulled up to a stop in front of a large, luxurious building, Margaret couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. She had no idea what was waiting for her inside, but for the first time in years, she felt like there was hope, real hope, for a future that wasn't defined by struggle and survival. William looked at her one last time before stepping out of the car. Welcome to the beginning of a new chapter, he said, his voice low but filled with promise. Margaret took a deep breath and followed him inside, ready to face whatever came next. The doors were open, and this time, she was walking through them. The building William led her into was unlike anything Margaret had ever seen. It was sleek, modern, and towering, standing as a testament to the empire William Castellano had built over the years. As they walked through the doors, the cool, polished floors gleamed under the bright lights, and the air was filled with a sense of wealth and power. It was overwhelming, and for a brief moment, Margaret felt out of place, as though she didn't belong in a space like this. But she quickly pushed that thought aside. This was her opportunity, and she wasn't going to let fear stop her. William led her through the lobby, past rooms filled with workers dressed in business attire, heads down, focused on their tasks. They barely spared her a glance, but she could feel their eyes lingering on William. He was a man who commanded respect wherever he went. They reached a sleek elevator, and William pressed the button for the top floor. As the elevator ascended, Margaret couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. She had never been in such a luxurious setting. She had always lived simply, doing everything she could just to get by. But now, standing here, she felt like she was stepping into a completely different world. The doors opened with a soft chime, and William stepped out first, holding the door open for her. Margaret followed him down a long hallway, her heels clicking against the marble floors. The hall was lined with elegant artwork, and the walls were a soft, neutral color that made everything feel calm, yet imposing. They reached a large set of double doors, and William opened them without hesitation. Inside was a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the entire city. The room was filled with expensive furniture, but what caught Margaret's eye was the view. It was breathtaking. William walked over to his desk, which was made of polished wood, and gestured for Margaret to sit in one of the plush chairs across from him. As she settled into the chair, she couldn't help but feel nervous. She had no idea what to expect. William, however, seemed completely at ease. He leaned back in his chair and regarded her for a moment before speaking. I know this is all overwhelming, he said, his voice calm and measured. But I want you to understand something. This is only the beginning. You're here because you've earned it. You've worked harder than most people I know, and now it's time to get the respect you deserve. Margaret swallowed hard, trying to absorb his words. She had never thought of herself as someone deserving of respect, at least not the kind that William was offering. But now, sitting in this lavish office, with him offering her a chance to change her life, it felt real. It felt possible. What do I have to do? She asked, her voice steady despite the nerves twisting in her stomach. William smiled, but it was a smile that was both reassuring and calculating. First, you're going to stop thinking of yourself as invisible. You've spent your whole life trying to stay out of the spotlight, doing the work no one else wants to do. But now, Margaret, it's time to take a step into that spotlight. You're going to show people who you really are. Margaret blinked, unsure if she fully understood what he meant. How do I do that? She asked. William leaned forward slightly, his eyes intense. I'm going to introduce you to some people who can change your future. People who will help you build a business, create opportunities, and ultimately change the way you live. But you have to trust me, and you have to believe in yourself. Margaret's heart began to race. She wasn't sure what kind of people William had in mind, but the thought of working alongside them, of having a future beyond just scraping by, was both exciting and terrifying. You've spent too long letting the world tell you what you can't do, William continued, his voice low and steady. It's time to take control, Margaret. You have more power than you realize. Margaret's mind raced as she processed his words. She had spent her whole life just trying to survive, never thinking about what more she could accomplish. She had always felt like the world had its rules, and she just had to follow them. But now, William was offering her a chance to break those rules, to rewrite the story of her life. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. William's gaze softened, and he stood up, walking around the desk to stand in front of her. You can, he said firmly. You've already done the hardest part. You've survived. Now it's time to thrive. Margaret took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words sink in. For the first time in a long time, she felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. It was a small spark, but it was enough to make her believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be the beginning of something new. William extended his hand to her, and she took it, her grip firm and steady. Let's make this happen, Margaret, he said, his voice full of promise. The world won't know what hit it. As they shook hands, Margaret realized that this was her moment. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for her entire life. She wasn't invisible anymore, and she wasn't going to let anyone make her feel that way again. As the days passed, Margaret found herself becoming more and more accustomed to the new life that William had promised her. She was no longer the woman standing at the bank counter, humiliated and invisible. Now, she was someone with a future that was being shaped by opportunities she had never imagined for herself. William had introduced her to a network of people, powerful, influential individuals who had the means to help her, but more importantly, they believed in her. They saw something in her that Margaret had never fully seen in herself. Every meeting, every conversation, every piece of advice was pushing her towards something greater. But it wasn't without its challenges. Margaret had spent her whole life working behind the scenes, doing the tasks others didn't want to do, never seeking the spotlight. Now, she was being thrust into it, and with that came a whirlwind of emotions. There were moments of self-doubt, moments when she questioned whether she was really capable of stepping into this new world. But William was always there, offering her the reassurance she needed. You're stronger than you think, he would say, his voice always calm, always steady. You've been fighting your whole life. Now, it's time to fight for something bigger. Margaret had come to trust him, not just because of his power, but because of the way he believed in her. He never once doubted her, even when she had doubts about herself. His confidence in her became her anchor, and with each passing day, her confidence grew as well. One afternoon, William called her into his office. She had become used to these meetings, though each time she stepped into his office, the gravity of it all still made her stomach flutter. This time, though, there was something different about the way he looked at her. It was as if he had something important to say. I've been watching your progress, he said, leaning back in his chair. You've come a long way, Margaret. But there's one more step I think you're ready to take. Margaret raised an eyebrow, unsure of what he meant. What step? She asked, her curiosity piqued. William smiled, though it was a smile that held a hint of mystery. I want you to start leading, he said simply. You've been following, learning, growing. Now, it's time for you to take charge. Margaret's heart skipped a beat. Led? She had never seen herself as a leader. She had always been the one working in the background, the one supporting others, never the one calling the shots. Lead? She repeated, unsure of how to process the word. William nodded. Yes, you have the skills. You have the vision. Now it's time to step up. I'm giving you an opportunity to take the reins on a project that will elevate you to the next level. Margaret felt the weight of his words sink in. She had spent so many years following others, but now she was being asked to lead. It was both exciting and terrifying. What kind of project? She asked, her voice betraying the nervousness she was trying to suppress. William leaned forward, his expression serious. I'm going to have you lead a new venture, he said. It's going to be big, and it's going to require everything you've learned so far. But I know you can do it. Margaret's mind raced. This was it, the opportunity she had been waiting for, the chance to truly take control of her future. But the fear still lingered. Could she really do this? Could she lead a project of this magnitude? William must have sensed her hesitation, because he spoke again, his voice steady and unwavering. Margaret, you've spent your whole life proving your worth to others. Now, it's time to prove it to yourself. Those words hit her like a jolt of electricity. Prove it to herself. She had spent so many years trying to prove to others that she was capable, that she was worthy. But now, the only person she needed to prove it to was herself. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. This was her moment. Okay, she said, her voice firm. I'll do it. William's smile grew, and he stood up, extending his hand to her. I knew you would, he said. This is the beginning of something big, Margaret. You're ready. As she shook his hand, Margaret felt a surge of determination rise within her. She wasn't just taking on a project, she was taking control of her life. She was no longer the invisible woman. She was someone who could stand tall and lead. And as she left William's office that day, she felt a sense of empowerment that she had never experienced before. She was ready. The future was hers to create, and she was going to make sure it was everything she had always dreamed it could be. Margaret's first day leading the new venture was nothing like she expected. She had imagined it would be easy, that she would step into the role with confidence. But the reality was far more daunting. Walking into the high-rise office building with a deep breath, Margaret felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. This was no longer just about surviving. It was about proving herself. She was no longer the quiet woman who worked in the background. She was now the leader. Her team was small but incredibly talented, and they all looked at her with eager eyes. They were counting on her, and that thought alone made her heart race. As she sat down at the head of the conference table, she could feel their eyes on her, waiting for her to speak. She had always been the one to follow, to take orders, but now she was the one giving them. All right, she began, her voice shaking slightly, but she forced herself to steady it. We have a lot of work ahead of us. I want us to create something impactful, something that will make a difference, not just for us, but for others. The room was silent as they listened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Margaret felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The project she was overseeing was a bold one, something that could change the way people viewed her and, ultimately, change her life. It was a new business venture, one that William had connected her with, and it was up to her to lead it to success. Over the next few weeks, Margaret threw herself into the work, learning everything she could about the industry, the market, and the people she was working with. Her team was supportive, but the pressure of being in charge was overwhelming. She felt the weight of every decision, every word, every action. Every time she looked at her laptop, the numbers seemed to blur. Every time she spoke in a meeting, she could feel the eyes of her team on her, waiting for her to lead them to success. There were moments when she doubted herself. Was she really ready for this? Was she cut out for the responsibility? And then, just as quickly as the doubt crept in, she reminded herself why she was here. She had worked hard for this moment. She had earned it. There was no turning back now. One evening, after a long day of meetings and phone calls, Margaret sat alone in her office, staring out the window at the city below. The lights of the skyline twinkled, but she didn't feel the usual awe she had always experienced. Tonight, it felt different. Tonight, the city seemed far away, distant, as if it were someone else's world, not hers. She was no longer just a small part of the bigger picture. She was now the one making decisions that would impact that picture. It was a powerful, daunting thought. Just then, her phone buzzed, interrupting the stillness of the room. It was a text from William. I'm proud of you, Margaret. You've come a long way. Just remember, you're never alone in this. I'm here if you need me. Margaret smiled as she read the message. It had been a while since she had heard from William. He had been busy, and so had she, but his words meant more than she realized. He had believed in her from the start. He had seen something in her when no one else had. William's support had been a constant, a reassuring force that kept her going, even on the toughest days. Taking a deep breath, Margaret stood up and walked over to the window. She could hear the distant hum of the city, the voices, the cars, the life going on beneath her. She felt connected to it in a way she never had before. This was her world now. This was her time. The next morning, Margaret arrived at the office early, determined to start the day strong. She had learned a lot in the past few weeks, but there was still so much to do. The next phase of the project was crucial, and she knew that everything depended on her ability to lead her team effectively. As she entered the conference room, she noticed the energy had shifted. Her team was more engaged, more motivated. They had begun to believe in the vision she had shared, and they were ready to move forward. Margaret felt a surge of pride. This was it. This was the moment when everything started to come together. All right, she said as she walked to the front of the room, her voice steady and confident. We've got a lot to accomplish, but I'm confident that we can make this happen. Let's make something great. Her team nodded, and Margaret could see the trust in their eyes. It wasn't just about her leading them. It was about them believing in her. And that was something she hadn't expected. She had always been the one following, never the one people looked to for answers. But now, here she was, leading them with purpose. As the meeting continued, Margaret felt her confidence growing with every decision she made, with every idea she presented. The weight of responsibility was still there, but it was no longer overwhelming. It was motivating. This was her time, and she was determined to make the most of it. As the meeting wrapped up, one of her team members, Sarah, stood up and spoke. "Margaret, I just wanted to say, we're lucky to have you as our leader. You've really brought us together. I believe in this project because I believe in you." Margaret's heart swelled. It wasn't just about the project anymore. It was about them, about the people she had the privilege of working with. She had proven herself to them, and more importantly, she had proven something to herself. She was a leader, and as she watched her team leave the room, filled with energy and excitement, she knew that this was only the beginning. The future was hers to shape. The days that followed Margaret's decision to lead were both exhilarating and overwhelming. The momentum of the project began to build, and Margaret found herself more and more immersed in every detail. Her team had grown to trust her, and she could feel the weight of their expectations with every decision she made. It was no longer just about survival, about keeping her head above water. It was about taking control of her life, about shaping her future in ways she had never imagined possible. The long hours at the office had become a routine, one that she embraced fully. Margaret was no stranger to hard work, but this was different. This time, her work was leading her somewhere. The constant meetings, strategy sessions, and endless emails were all part of a bigger picture, and Margaret was at the center of it. As the weeks passed, she began to see the fruits of her labor. The project was gaining traction, and the feedback from William and the people he had introduced her to was overwhelmingly positive. She had earned the respect of her team, and they were starting to believe in the vision she had shared with them. But even as she saw the success unfold, the pressure of being in charge began to take its toll. Margaret had always been the one to handle everything on her own, to take on whatever was necessary without asking for help. But now, she realized that leadership came with its own set of challenges. She had to make decisions that impacted not only the success of the project, but also the future of everyone involved. And with that came a sense of responsibility that weighed heavily on her. One evening, as she sat alone in her office, staring at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Margaret's thoughts wandered. She had come so far, but there was still so much to do. The project wasn't finished yet, and the pressure to keep it moving forward was relentless. She felt like she was balancing on the edge, trying not to tip over. The silence in the office was broken by the sound of her phone ringing. It was a message from William. "How are you holding up?" it read. Margaret smiled softly at the screen, feeling a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. William had been a steady presence in her life, offering advice, encouragement, and, when necessary, a reality check. He had believed in her from the start, even when she hadn't believed in herself. She quickly typed a response. "It's a lot, but I'm managing. Thank you for always being there." William's reply came almost immediately. "You've got this, Margaret. But remember, it's okay to ask for help when you need it. You're not alone in this." His words resonated with her more than she realized. She had always prided herself on doing everything on her own, but maybe it was time to admit that she didn't have to carry the weight alone. The next morning, Margaret made a decision. She called a meeting with her team, something she had been avoiding until now. She had always been the one giving direction, but today, she would do something different. She would ask for their input. She would lean on them the way she should have from the beginning. As her team gathered around the conference table, Margaret stood up, looking around at the faces she had come to rely on. They were all focused, ready for the next steps. But Margaret knew that the next step wasn't about her. It was about them. "I've been doing a lot of the heavy lifting on my own," she began, her voice steady but vulnerable. "And I've realized that I can't do it all. I need your help. We're in this together, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page, moving forward as a team." The room fell silent for a moment, and then one of her team members, Sarah, spoke up. "Margaret, we've got your back. You've led us through this so far, and we believe in what we're doing. We're here to help, and we're with you every step of the way." Margaret felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She had known they would support her, but hearing it from them made all the difference. It wasn't just about being a leader anymore. It was about being part of a team. The project was no longer just hers to carry. It belonged to all of them. As the meeting progressed, Margaret felt the dynamics shift. The pressure that had once felt unbearable now felt like a shared responsibility. She wasn't alone in this. And with that realization, Margaret felt a new surge of energy, ready to take on whatever came next. The work ahead of them was still substantial, but she knew now that she didn't have to face it by herself. By the time the meeting ended, the team had laid out a clear plan for the next phase of the project. Margaret looked at the group of people she had come to trust, feeling a sense of gratitude and pride. They were more than just her colleagues. They were her partners, and together, they were building something that could change their lives. Later that evening, as Margaret walked out of the building, she looked up at the city skyline once again. The lights of the city shimmered, but this time, it didn't feel distant. It felt close, like it was hers to shape. And for the first time in a long time, Margaret knew that she was not just a survivor. She was a leader, standing tall, surrounded by a team that believed in her. The future was bright, and she was ready to face it head-on. As the weeks went by, Margaret began to realize just how much had changed in her life. The project she had taken on was thriving, and her team was performing at a level she never thought possible. She had pushed herself, stepping into a role that, at first, seemed too big for her, but now it felt like it had always been meant for her. Every decision she made, every move she made, was leading them closer to their goals. William's confidence in her had paid off, and she could feel her own confidence growing by the day. Yet, even as everything was moving forward, a nagging feeling began to settle in the pit of her stomach. The further she progressed in the project, the more the weight of the responsibility began to feel heavy again. It was one thing to prove she could lead, but it was another to sustain that leadership, to constantly live up to the expectations of those who now looked to her for guidance. She was no longer just a participant. She was a driving force, and that brought with it a kind of pressure that she hadn't anticipated. Margaret had always been someone who pushed herself to the limit, who never asked for help. But now, as the project grew, she realized that even she couldn't do it all. One evening, after another long day of meetings and strategy sessions, Margaret found herself sitting in her office, staring at her computer screen. Her mind raced, filled with endless details and decisions, but all she could focus on was the thought that she couldn't keep up this pace forever. She needed help. And as if on cue, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from William. "I've been hearing good things, Margaret. You're doing great. But remember, you don't have to carry it all by yourself. Reach out when you need to." His words hit her hard. She had been so focused on proving herself, on showing everyone, including herself, that she could do this, that she had neglected the one thing that had gotten her to this point, the support of others. Margaret sat back in her chair, looking out the window at the city below. She had spent so many years feeling like she was invisible, like no one was looking out for her. But now, with William's help, with the support of her team, she realized that it was okay to lean on others, to ask for help. She didn't have to do it all alone. With a deep breath, she picked up her phone and dialed Sarah, one of her team members who had become a trusted ally in the project. "Sarah," Margaret said when she answered, "I need to talk. Can you meet me for a coffee tomorrow morning?" "Of course," Sarah replied without hesitation. "I'll be there." The next morning, Margaret met Sarah at a small cafe just a few blocks from the office. The place was quiet, a cozy spot away from the bustling city. As they sat down with their coffee, Sarah looked at Margaret with a knowing expression. "You've been carrying a lot on your shoulders," she said softly. Margaret sighed, nodding. "I thought I could handle it all, but I'm starting to realize that I don't have to do it alone." Sarah smiled warmly, her eyes filled with understanding. "None of us can," she said. "That's why we're a team. You don't have to do everything by yourself. We're here to help." Margaret felt a sense of relief wash over her as she listened to Sarah's words. For the first time in weeks, the weight on her shoulders felt a little lighter. She didn't have to carry it all. Her team was there to support her, just as William had always said. "Thank you," Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion. "I needed to hear that." Sarah reached across the table and gave her a reassuring smile. "You've done an amazing job, Margaret. You've led us through some tough times, and we're all here because we believe in you. Don't ever forget that." As they finished their coffee and left the cafe, Margaret felt a renewed sense of strength. She had been so focused on proving herself that she had forgotten one of the most important lessons she had learned along the way. Leadership wasn't about doing everything alone. It was about building a strong team and knowing when to ask for help. Later that day, As Margaret returned to the office, she felt more at ease. She was no longer carrying the burden of perfection on her shoulders. She was leading with her team, and that made all the difference. As the days went on, Margaret found herself delegating more, trusting her team to take on responsibilities and relying on their strengths. The project continued to move forward, and Margaret began to realize that success didn't come from doing everything herself. It came from trusting others and working together toward a common goal. The pressure didn't disappear, but it was no longer overwhelming. It was manageable because she was no longer facing it alone. One afternoon, as Margaret walked into the office, she was greeted with applause from her team. They had just hit a major milestone in the project, and everyone was celebrating. William had arranged a small surprise celebration for her and the team, a way to acknowledge their hard work and success. "This is just the beginning," William said as he raised his glass in a toast. "But I'm proud of all of you. Margaret, you've led this team with strength, vision, and heart. And that's what makes you a true leader." Margaret smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She had come so far, and while there was still more to accomplish, she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer just surviving. She was thriving. And it was because she had learned the true meaning of leadership, not as a solitary journey, but as one that was shared with others. As Margaret stood in the center of her office, her hands trembling slightly as she looked over the latest report, she felt a strange mixture of pride and unease. The project had reached a critical point, and her team had been working tirelessly to make it a success. Yet, the pressure of ensuring everything came together perfectly was starting to weigh on her. She had come so far from the quiet, reserved woman she once was, but now, as the stakes grew higher, she could feel the burden of leadership growing heavier. She had built something incredible, a project that not only had the potential to change her life, but also the lives of everyone involved. But she knew this was the point where things could go either way. The next few steps would determine everything. As she sat at her desk, reflecting on how far she had come, her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from William. "I trust you're handling everything well, but remember, it's okay to take a step back when you need to. Your team is capable, and they look up to you. You're not alone." The reassurance in his words comforted her, and for the first time in a while, she allowed herself to exhale. She had always been the one to carry the weight, to do it all on her own. But William had been right. She didn't have to do it all. She had a team, a group of people who respected her, who believed in her vision, and who were just as invested in the project's success as she was. Margaret looked around her office, at the achievements she had made, and realized that she wasn't alone anymore. She had the support she needed. The pressure didn't feel so unbearable anymore. She had the strength to lead, and that was something she had to remind herself of every day. Later that day, she called a meeting with her team. It was time to address the next steps and ensure everyone was aligned. As her team gathered in the conference room, Margaret stood in front of them, ready to take charge. But something had shifted in her. She had learned the importance of collaboration, of trusting the people around her, and she wasn't afraid to let her team contribute their ideas and insights. "We've made incredible progress," she began, her voice steady and filled with confidence. "But we're not finished yet. We're at a crucial moment, and we need to make sure we're all on the same page as we move forward." Her team nodded, eager to hear her thoughts. Margaret continued, "I know I've been at the helm of this project from the start, but I want to hear from each of you. Your ideas, your perspectives, they matter. We're in this together, and I trust you." As she spoke, Margaret could see the respect in her team's eyes. They believed in her, yes, but they also knew that she valued them. They were a team, partners in this journey, and they all had a role to play in its success. The meeting progressed smoothly, with everyone contributing their insights, offering suggestions, and working together to refine the next steps. It was the first time Margaret truly felt the weight of leadership lift from her shoulders. She wasn't alone. Her team was as committed to the project's success as she was, and they were all working toward the same goal. By the time the meeting ended, Margaret felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in weeks. The pressure was still there, but it wasn't as overwhelming anymore. She had the support of her team, and that made all the difference. The next few days passed in a blur of action. Meetings, presentations, and countless decisions had to be made, but Margaret found herself handling them with a newfound sense of ease. She had learned to trust in her team, to let them take ownership of their roles, and it paid off. The project was moving forward, and everything seemed to be falling into place. Margaret knew that they were approaching a critical point. The project was about to go public, and the world would be watching. But for the first time in a long time, she felt ready. She had worked hard to get here, and she had proven herself. More importantly, she had earned the respect of the people around her. As the project's launch date approached, Margaret couldn't help but reflect on how much she had changed. She had gone from a woman who was invisible, who had been pushed aside and overlooked, to a leader who commanded respect. She had proven that she was capable of more than just surviving. She was thriving. When the launch day arrived, Margaret stood before her team one last time before they stepped out into the public eye. "We've worked hard for this moment," she said, her voice full of pride. "And now, it's time to show the world what we've built. Let's make it count." As her team filed out to prepare for the big day, Margaret stayed behind for a moment, looking out at the city skyline. It had been a long journey, and the road ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear: she was ready. Ready to take on whatever came next. Ready to prove that the woman who once stood at the bank, humiliated and invisible, was now someone who could not only stand tall, but lead the way. And with that, Margaret walked out of her office, ready to face the future. The morning of the launch day arrived, and Margaret stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office, gazing out at the sprawling city below. The skyline shimmered in the early light, a constant reminder of how far she had come. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago, she had been standing in the bank, humiliated and invisible, unsure of how to take the next step. Now, she was at the helm of something that could change her life and the lives of those around her. Today was the day everything would come to fruition. The launch was more than just the culmination of a project. It was a testament to her growth, her resilience, and the trust she had earned from her team. Margaret had spent years working behind the scenes, never asking for recognition, always focusing on survival. But now, she was leading. She was in control, and for the first time, she understood what that really meant. The pressure had been mounting for weeks, and as the hours ticked down to the official launch, the weight of it all seemed to intensify. She was ready, but there was still a lingering doubt. Was she truly prepared for the level of scrutiny that would come next? Was the world ready for her to step into the spotlight? Margaret quickly pushed those thoughts aside. She had come this far, and there was no turning back now. She had a team of people who believed in her, and together, they had worked tirelessly to get to this point. As she walked through the office, she saw her team preparing for the launch, setting up presentations, reviewing last-minute details, and making final adjustments. The energy was palpable, everyone was focused, but there was an undercurrent of excitement. They were ready to show the world what they had built. Margaret walked over to Sarah, who was reviewing the launch materials on her tablet. "How's everything going?" Margaret asked, trying to hide the nervousness in her voice. Sarah looked up with a reassuring smile. "Everything's set. We're ready. You've done an amazing job leading us to this point, Margaret. We're all in this together." Margaret smiled, grateful for Sarah's support. It meant more than she could express. "Thanks, Sarah. I couldn't have done it without you and the team." As the launch time approached, Margaret stood in the conference room, watching the final preparations unfold. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she wasn't afraid. This was the moment she had been working toward for so long, and now, it was time to take the next step. As she took her place at the front of the room, she felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about presenting the project. It was about stepping into a new version of herself. A version who was no longer afraid to claim her place in the world. "All right, everyone," she said, her voice steady and confident. "We've worked hard to get here, and today is the day we show the world what we've accomplished. This is our chance to make an impact, to show that we belong, that we are more than just the sum of our past experiences." Her team nodded, their faces filled with pride and determination. They believed in her, and she could feel that belief pushing her forward. The launch began, and, as the presentations rolled out, Margaret felt a sense of clarity and purpose she had never experienced before. Every slide, every word, every moment felt like a reflection of everything she had worked for. As the last slide faded from the screen, the room was silent for a moment, and then the applause began. It was a soft, tentative sound at first, but soon it grew louder, more confident. Margaret's heart swelled as she stood before her team, the weight of everything she had accomplished settling in. This was just the beginning, but it was a monumental step forward. William, who had been present throughout the launch, walked over to her with a smile. "I knew you had it in you, Margaret. You've proven yourself today." Margaret smiled, her eyes filling with emotion. "Thank you, William. I couldn't have done it without you." He nodded. "It's all you, Margaret. You've earned this. And today, you've shown the world what you're capable of." As the launch event came to a close, Margaret stood in the corner of the room, watching her team celebrate their success. They had done it. Together, they had built something remarkable, and Margaret had led them every step of the way. The overwhelming pressure that had been building for so long began to ease, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and pride. She wasn't just a leader in name. She was a leader because she had earned it. For the first time in her life, Margaret felt truly seen. She had worked tirelessly to get to this point, but she realized that it wasn't just the success of the project that mattered. It was the journey, how she had grown, how she had learned to trust others, how she had discovered her own strength. She had faced doubts, challenges, and setbacks, but each one had made her stronger. Margaret knew that this was just the beginning. There was still so much more to accomplish, so many more challenges to face. But for the first time in a long time, she felt ready for whatever came next. As the team gathered to celebrate, Margaret took a moment to step outside and breathe in the fresh air. The city stretched out before her, vibrant and full of possibilities. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer afraid. Margaret had proven to herself that she was capable of so much more than she had ever imagined. And now, the world would see it too. The weeks that followed the successful launch were a whirlwind of activity. Margaret had barely caught her breath before she was thrust into the next phase of the project. The company's profile had skyrocketed after the launch, and with it, the expectations. Everyone, from her team to investors, was watching her every move. It wasn't just about success anymore. It was about sustaining it. Margaret had made it to the top, but now the climb felt even steeper. As the days passed, she found herself waking up earlier, staying later, and constantly thinking about what needed to be done next. Her mind raced with details, budgets, timelines, meetings, and yet, in the midst of it all, Margaret felt a growing sense of confidence. She was no longer the woman who doubted herself, who questioned every move. She had proven that she could lead, that she could build something meaningful. But there was one thing that still made her uneasy. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was living under a microscope. The pressure to continue succeeding was immense, and every decision she made felt like it could tip the scale. She had come so far, but now, the weight of her success was becoming increasingly difficult to bear alone. Margaret had always prided herself on doing things herself, on handling challenges on her own. But with the stakes so high, she began to realize the importance of leaning on others. The success of the project wasn't just about her. It was about the team, the collective effort that had brought them here. She had learned that leadership didn't mean carrying the burden alone. It meant trusting others to share that responsibility. One evening, as Margaret sat in her office reviewing reports, she received a call from William. She had been expecting it. They had been in touch regularly since the launch, and he had been monitoring the project's progress closely. "How are things going?" he asked, his voice calm as always. Margaret leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath before responding. "Everything's moving forward, but I can feel the pressure building. There's a lot riding on this, and it feels like I can't stop moving for even a second." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and Margaret could practically hear William thinking. "Margaret," he said after a moment, his tone steady, "you've already accomplished more than most people ever will. But you don't have to do this alone. Your team is with you, and you've earned their trust. Trust yourself, and trust them." Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, letting his words sink in. She had heard them before, but hearing them again, especially from William, brought a sense of clarity she desperately needed. She wasn't alone. And that was the key. She didn't have to carry everything on her shoulders. She had built a team that believed in her, and that belief was mutual. "You're right," Margaret said softly. "I've been so focused on proving I can handle it all, but I don't have to. I can lean on my team." "Exactly," William replied. "And that's what makes a great leader, knowing when to rely on others." "You're doing great, Margaret. Just keep trusting in yourself and those around you." After they ended the call, Margaret sat in silence for a moment, reflecting on his words. She had spent so much time trying to prove she was capable of doing it all, but in doing so, she had almost lost sight of the most important lesson of all. Leadership wasn't about perfection. It was about collaboration. It was about empowering those around you to share in the journey. The next morning, Margaret called another team meeting. This time, she made a conscious decision to shift the dynamic. Instead of simply giving orders or delegating tasks, she wanted to open the floor for feedback, for collaboration. As the team gathered, she looked around the room and realized how much they had all grown. They weren't just a group of individuals working toward a common goal anymore. They were a cohesive unit, bound by trust and a shared vision. "I've been doing a lot of the decision-making on my own," Margaret began, her voice confident yet humble. "And while I've learned a lot, I've come to realize that I need all of you to succeed. We're in this together, and I want to make sure we're all contributing to the next steps. So, I'm opening the floor today. What do you all think? Where do we go from here?" For a moment, the room was silent, as if everyone was processing the shift in dynamic. Then Sarah, one of Margaret's most trusted team members, spoke up. "I think it's time we take things to the next level. We've done great work so far, but now we need to focus on scaling. We have the foundation, now it's about building on it." The team began to speak up one by one, offering ideas and strategies for moving forward. As Margaret listened, she realized just how much she had underestimated the collective power of her team. They all had valuable insights to share, and together, they could take the project even further. The sense of pressure that had been looming over her began to fade, replaced by a renewed sense of optimism. This wasn't just her burden to carry anymore. It was a shared responsibility, and that made all the difference. As the meeting concluded, Margaret felt a sense of relief wash over her. She didn't need to have all the answers. She didn't need to be perfect. What mattered was that she had built a team that was capable of taking on whatever came next. She had learned that true leadership was about empowering others, about knowing when to step back and let the team lead. And with that realization, Margaret walked out of the conference room, ready for whatever came next. She wasn't just leading a project anymore. She was leading a movement, and together, her team and she were unstoppable. Romance stories are filled with emotion, unexpected twists, and characters who find themselves navigating worlds of contrasting power and vulnerability. In these tales, characters often find themselves tested, not only by external circumstances, but by the profound feelings they develop for one another. Whether it's a powerful figure like a mafia boss or a seemingly meek servant, the clash between their worlds creates a tension that is irresistible to readers and viewers alike. As the story unfolds, the development of deep emotional connections between opposites brings about powerful moments of personal growth and mutual understanding. In these romance stories, the magic happens when characters who should never have met are forced to confront their feelings and the situations that keep them apart. What makes these stories truly captivating is how love, kindness, and even justice can change the trajectory of lives that initially seemed so different. These romance stories offer more than just love. They provide a narrative of self-discovery, of fighting for what's right, and of discovering the strength to stand up against the odds. As we dive deeper into the lives of these characters, we realize that sometimes love isn't just about passion, but about the sacrifices, the vulnerability, and the courage to stand by one another through life's toughest challenges. So whether it's a powerful mafia boss falling for a maid or a seemingly ordinary person stepping into a world of danger, romance stories have a unique way of touching hearts and proving that love can cross any boundary.